Hello and welcome back. In this final video of the Next.js image gallery series, we will add pagination to the application so we can view all of the image results instead of just the first page. So this is our current project, and if I scroll down to the bottom, there's no place for us to go. We only get one page of results. But if I look at the final result, so this is what we'll be working towards, and I scroll down to the bottom, there's an indication there is more. When I click on that, we should be taken to the second page of results, and now at the bottom, we're given several pages. Notice we're on page 2, so it's not underlined like a link, but pages 3, 4, and 5 are. Likewise, we could click the left arrows to go back one previous page, or if we click the right arrows, we'll go to page 6. So I could go ahead and do that as well. And now we're on page 6, and you can see that indicated in the URL at the top where it says curated/6, because remember, we're using the curated images from the home page. Now, what if we request a page that doesn't exist, say page 1000? Then we're going to get no images found. However, I know how many pages there are for curated right now. There are 533. So if I put that in, we get the last page of results, and then just like the first page that indicated more, we now get the indication to go back. And as we go back through the results, we just get one page when we're within 5 pages of the end result. But if we go back to where there are still 5 pages of results to be found at page 529, I believe, yes, now we have the page numbers. So when we go to the next page, or that was actually the last page, we could go back to where we were. And if I go to page 530 and there aren't 5 pages of results ahead, that's when it starts to just show the one page. Then you can go to the next page, which would be 531, or the previous page. So that's how our pagination is going to work. Let's get started on it in VS Code. I'm in VS Code, and for our first step today, we need to look at the results path, and then we have the dynamic route where it is passed a search term. We want to rename this because we're going to also be passing in a page param, so this needs to accept multiple params, and we can do that with a catch-all route. So let's rename this directory. I'll just right-click and choose rename. You see F2 would also be an option for that. And now we're still going to use brackets, but inside of the brackets we want 3 dots. Then I'm just going to call this my params and close with another bracket. And now we need to modify the page.tsx to handle both params as well. So let's start with the props in our page.tsx, and this term needs to change to my params. Wait a minute, let's select that. There we go. My params. And now this won't just be a string. So it's going to be an array where we get our results from, or our params from, but this could be a string, or it could also be undefined data. So we need to have both of those possibilities inside the array. So that is our new type for the params. Now, our changes to generate metadata and to search results will be very similar. So we're going to change the term in params to my params. And then inside of generate metadata, we need to get some values. So I'm going to say const topic. This would be the search topic, for example, will come from my params. And now this will be inside the array. So if it exists, I'll use optional chaining to ensure that I'm checking to see if it exists. We're going to get that first element in the array. And if it doesn't exist, I'm going to use this nullish coalescing operator here to say, okay, if that element doesn't exist, I'm going to assign the topic curated. Now for this next definition, I need the page value. This is going to be much the same, so we're looking at my params, but it's going to be the second element in the array, once again using that nullish coalescing operator, and if it doesn't exist, I'm going to assign page 1. And now we can use these in the title of the page, so it's going to be results for topic, and then I can go ahead and give a dash and say page, and then we can display the page number as well. So as we page through the results, each title will change and at least indicate the page number of the results. Okay, I'm going to scroll up just a little bit so we can see the search results function better. And now this also needs to be my params. And now I just want to copy where we define topic and page, because we're going to do the exact same thing inside of this search results function. So I'll paste both of those in. And now that we have those values, we're going to pass in the topic value here. And then we're also going to pass in the page value to gallery. Now we haven't set up the gallery component to accept the page value yet, and that's why you see the red squiggly from TypeScript, but we will adjust that next. Let's go to the gallery component and we'll start with the props. Now we have to consider that we will be coming to the gallery component from the default page when we load the app and it passes no props whatsoever, or we could be coming from that results path as well. So we have to consider both of those when we look at the props. So we'll say the topic could be a string when it's in the results path. It's definitely a string, we ensured that, but of course it could be undefined when we load the app and we're on the home page. Let's go ahead and put a comma here and then use Shift Alt and the down arrow to just copy this down, because page will be the same way. So I'm going to put page right there for the second prop, and that's all we need to do to define the props. We just have to consider where the gallery is being loaded from, and then that of course impacts the rest. Now, as far as that home page, once again, we aren't passing in any props, but we want a default value for topic to equal curated if it doesn't receive any props. So it's going to be curated by default, and then also we will receive the page. And then let me press Alt-Z so that wraps down, but they're both in the props. So that's as expected. And now we're going to have a larger if-else statement here instead of this ternary statement. We're going to have a little bit more logic involved as to what URL to use to request our images from. And I think it's just going to be easier to read if it is a larger if-else statement. So instead of checking the topic like we are there, I'm going to say let URL, and then after that we'll start our if-else statement. And the first is if topic equals curated, and we have a page value. And now we'll of course have something inside this if this is true. Now I want to note here what each of these is for. So this is if we're browsing beyond the home page. I could just say browsing beyond home. That's fine. Now, if we're browsing beyond home, we're already going to have the topic curated because we're on the home page, and then we have a page value. So that means we don't see those page numbers until we're on the second page. So we're already beyond the home page, and then we're going to click one of those other page values. So we're going to have a page value there. And that's where this comes in. So it's not going to be just this default route. It's going to be a lot like it, but it's also going to have a page value with it. So I want URL equals, and I'll paste in this URL, but let's make it a template literal. And then we're going to need to add the page param here at the end. So I'm going to have a question mark, page equals, and we're going to put that page value in. So that would be the URL if we're browsing beyond the home page and using that pagination to click through to other pages. Now we can have an else if, and here we'll just say topic equals curated, because we've already checked the page. So this would be topic is curated, but we don't have a page value. Well, this would be the home page. This is what happens when we don't pass anything in, because we're then assigning curated by default up here. So we can just say this is the result we'd get if we were on the home page, and that's going to be this URL right here that we were assigning for the home page as well. So now we can just say URL equals and paste that one in. Now let's look at our next option. So else if, now this is going to be if we don't have a page. Now we've already checked the possibilities for curated. So this means it's not curated. So this means it's going to be a search result that does not have a page with it. So it would be the first page of search results. So let me put that here. First page of search results is when we would want this URL. And this is the URL we're using right here. So Control X, I can cut that. And then over here, I just want URL equals, and I'll paste that in. Now we can get rid of this question mark and colon we were using in the ternary altogether. And finally, we have our else. Now what we're left with is the result if, yes, it's a search, but also it's providing a page. So now we want that same URL that we had above, but we need to add a page to it as well. So let's use the ampersand here and put in the second param, which is page equals, and pass in that page value. And those are our possibilities. So we've got browsing beyond the home, first page of search results, or search results beyond first page. And that should indicate what each of those is used for. Now I'm going to scroll down just a little further and we have something else to consider. Right now we're already checking to see if images does not exist. And if it doesn't, we're returning no images found. That's a good check, but we're also going to need to use the per page value that we get from the API. And we can look back here at our images model and we can see we're getting a per page as well as the previous page and next page and total results. So those are important for us to calculate our pagination values. So back in the gallery now, one thing we want to do is ensure we're not dividing by 0. And this could also help us if we already know there are no results per page essentially from the API, which it will indicate. So we can add an OR here, and we can also check to see if images.per_page equals 0. And if that's the case, we also want to return no images found. And this is also going to keep us from dividing by 0 later on, because we're going to use this per page and the total results to calculate exactly how many pages there are. So now I'm going to put a couple of comments in the gallery so we can come back. And one right here is to calculate our pagination, and then we will pull some values in. So we're going to create a function for that. And then we're also going to insert our footer down here below the section. And to do that, we're going to need a React fragment as the parent, because we couldn't have the section and the footer element here, or we would get a complaint. So let's go ahead and put in that fraction now so we don't forget later. I said fraction, a fragment is what this is called. So if we save, we can just see that's now the parent element essentially. And I'm going to put a note here that just says something like add footer. So I think I can just say // no, let's just do this. Add footer, and then I'll highlight this and do control / and it will add it as a comment. So we need to remember we're calculating here and then adding the footer there. So now let's create that new function, and it's going to go in our library directory here. So now we need a new page. I'm going to call this get prev next pages.ts. We'll start this file with an import type, and we want images results, and that comes from our model's images. Now we need a little helper function, and I should just warn you ahead, this is the one function where we're going to use some math, or the one file, and that's not always fun. I know some of us that learn to program aren't always mathematics majors, but we can calculate this pagination without too much pain, I believe. So let's go ahead now. We need this helper function. It's a simple one. So function get page number, and we're just going to extract the page number from the URLs, because that next page and previous page value from the API, both of those are actually full URLs. So here we need URL, and it's a string. Now inside this function, we're going to say const. We'll destructure the search params, and that's going to come from creating a new URL and passing in the URL value that we passed to the function. Then we're just going to return search params dot get, and we want the page param value. So that's just a little helper function that we're going to use in our main function now. So we'll have export default function get previous next pages. And now this is going to receive the images, and that is that images results type. Now, inside the function, let's start by defining the next page. And I'm using let because we may reassign it down the road. So here we're going to check the images to see that there is a next page value. So notice I'm using optional chaining. Now this is a ternary statement. So if true, we're going to call our get page number helper function and pass in images.next_page. If false, it will just be null. Now, this next one will be very similar. It's just for the previous page. So const previous page equals, and I'm going to copy this and then just change a couple things. So Control C, Control V to paste. But now instead of next page, here I'm going to highlight next, Control D to get the next one, and change those to previous. So that's essentially the same, but notice we're using const here. I'm not going to reassign previous page. This is going to stay whatever it gets assigned right here. And I believe if I save the file, yes, we get that indentation like we should have here. It makes it easier to read the ternary statement. Now, just a few more calculations. These may hurt the brain just a little bit, but I'll try to make it painless. Let's start with total pages. And there's going to be kind of a question here of how we want to calculate total pages. So first of all, this will be a ternary statement, and let's just look at the value that we get, or the result, from images.totalResults. So this is how many images, not how many pages. Now let's use the modulus, or modulo, if you will, and this just gives us the remainder. So what we're trying to see is it going to divide evenly, or is there going to be a decimal point afterwards? And that's really what we're looking at. Is there a remainder? So images.per page. And remember, we made sure we're not dividing by 0 because we're checking that before we're ever going to call this function into play. So now, if this ends up being 0, if there's no remainder, this would be false. And so if there's no remainder, we're going to use the false part of the ternary. If there is a remainder, we're going to use the true part. So let's handle the true part first. And that's going to be math.ceal. And now we're going to have images.total_results divided by images, I need dot, per page. So math ceal is going to round that up, and that's okay. I want the total pages number to be just a little bit higher, like 1 higher than it actually is, and we can use that when we're evaluating things in an if statement that's coming up. So now false, essentially, this is when it goes in there exactly evenly. So this calculation up here is going to equal 0. If it does, we're going to go to this false part right here. And now we don't need to round up. We're just going to use images.totalResults, and then we're going to divide by images.per page. But then I'm going to add 1 to it. Remember, I said I always want it to be 1 more than it is. Well, if we divide it evenly, it wouldn't be 1 more than it is. It would be right at that number. I want it to be 1 higher, and that's why I'm rounding up here, and that's why I'm adding 1 here for total pages. Again, that comes into play when I'm looking at the values here in just a moment. Okay, the first of 2 if statements now. So now we're going to say if the previous page exists, and now remember we need to use numbers here, but the previous page and next page, when you get params from a URL, they're strings. So we need to use parse int here to get the value. So this is going to be the previous page value. And now we're going to add 5, because remember, we want to look at like 5 numbers ahead. So if this is all less than the total pages, that's the if statement, then we're going to assign the next page value differently. And that's why we used let up here, so we could still assign it here. We're going to say next page equals, and we'll once again parse int the previous page, and then after that we're going to add 5 to it. This is all in parentheses because remember, next page still needs to be a string, as it is up here as well. It's either string or null, so we need to go ahead and say dot to string there. So now next page is definitely a string or null once again. So what this is doing here is setting the next page 5 ahead of the previous page if we have at least 5 pages yet to show. So that's why I'm checking that against the total pages. Otherwise, we're not going to go ahead and set that. And that's why at the very end, we didn't see those other pages to look at. We just saw 1 page when we got down to less than 5 pages left. That was in the example at the beginning. One more if statement here. And now I'm going to say if next page exists, and we have to parse int once again here on next page to get the value, and next page is greater than or equal to total pages. So this is if some high page is requested again, like 1000 that doesn't exist. Then we're going to set next page equal to null, and I can Alt-Z to wrap that down again. But remember, next page can be a string or null. So here we're just going to say, hey, the next page doesn't exist because you've requested a page that doesn't exist in the first place. So we're just making sure that if a high numbered page is requested, we don't have a next page value either. Okay, once we're finished with that, we're ready to return our values. And now we've got previous page and next page in the return. Now let's go back to our gallery component and put this in place. So we'll click on gallery, we'll go to the top, and we need to import the function we just created. So we're going to import get previous next pages, and that comes from our lib, and then get previous next pages. And now we can use it where we put in our note to calculate the pagination. So here I need to define const previous page and next page, and we could set those equal to get previous next pages, and we pass in images. Now I'm doing this here because we have the images. Now I could pass the images down into the footer and get these values there, but I decided to do it here. You could do it in either place. I think it's better to just get these specific values and send those into the footer than it is to send possibly a large object. So that's why I'm doing it here, but either would work. But now we're ready to define the footer props, what our footer component that we haven't created yet will receive. So I'm going to call this footer props. And I like to do this instead of just sending each one in individually when there's more than a couple of props. So here I want the topic, also want the current page, and I want next page and previous page. So we're going to pass this object into the footer component that we're about to create. Now let's create that footer component. I'll click New File. I'll name this footer.tsx. Inside, we want to import link, and that's going to come from next link. After that, we'll go ahead, wait a minute, not that. We want to delete that semicolon. I've been trying not to use those. We want to set up our type props. This is equal to our object. The topic is definitely going to be a string because remember we assigned a default value already there. The page may not be, so it could be a string or possibly undefined because remember when we come from the home page, it could be undefined, and anything that isn't passed in would be undefined. Now the previous page value is going to be a string or null, and I'll show you where we get that or null instead of undefined in a moment. We'll also say next page is string or null as well. So those are our prop types. Now, where do we get the null value? Well, remember back in our function, so if I scroll down to our get previous next function, this helper function here, if we look at the return type, get page number is string or null. So if that page param doesn't exist on this URL, it returns null instead of undefined here in this function. And that's why we're working with null here and here for previous and next page. So now that we've got our props set up, let's go ahead and start this footer function. I can use RFC, which is the ES7 React snippets, and that would create one. Let me go ahead and put an E here as well and see if we get the export on there. And that's not exactly what I want because it gave the default export at the bottom. That works, but I like to have it in the same line. So if I just do RFC, press tab, now I get export default function with the footer here. And what are we passing in? Well, it's going to receive the topic, the page, the previous page, and the next page, all those props we had listed above. And then we just say this is props. I'm going to press Alt-Z so that wraps down. And now we know we're receiving these four and we've defined those in the props. We're ready to move on to the rest of the function. Let's think about the first thing to consider, and that's if we don't have a previous page or if we don't have a next page. So we don't have both really, not an or. So I'll say if no previous page and no next page, well, then we don't really have anything to paginate, so we can just return. We won't expect to put anything to indicate any pagination because there's no need. Now let's define a page nums array. We're going to do this because we need to go ahead and calculate what page numbers to actually display on the page that exist between the previous page and next page value. And if you remember, we set that next page value 5 ahead as long as we could, as long as that didn't exceed the total pages. So now this would be a number array. We'll set that equal to an empty array for now. Now using const, we can still push values into the array. So I'm using const, but we are going to push some values in. And I'm just going to use really a for loop here, but I need to make sure we have values first. So I'm going to say if previous page and next page, then we'll go ahead and put our value, our for loop, to calculate the values here inside of this if. So now I'll say for let I equals parse int previous page. So this is where we'll be starting our loop at, +1. And then, so this would be like page 2, for example. We're going to display the number 2. We don't need to display the number 1. After that, we'll have I less than parse int next page. Because remember, we assign the next page value that's 5 ahead. We assign that to those right arrows. So we don't want to display that number either. So as long as it's less than those, and then we'll just say I ++. Don't know if you've written a for loop in a while. I usually use higher order functions like map and things like that. But in this case, this is a good way to go ahead and calculate those numbers. Then we just need to say page nums.push and push in I. So this gives us those values in between previous and next page, and now we have those in an array. Now I want to scroll for a little bit of room, and we need to calculate what we're going to display for the next page area. We're actually going to display 2 different areas on the page, the next page area and the previous page area. The next page area is smaller, so I'm going to start there. So I'll say const next page area. And now we'll set this equal to a ternary. So we're checking to make sure we have a next page value first. If we do, then we're going to, of course, deliver something in the true section of this ternary statement. And if not, we'll just set it to null because there won't be anything to display. Now in the true section, I'm going to use that link that we imported, set the href equal to a template literal. And this template literal is going to be /results/ this is where we have topic, so it's the first param in the URL. And then this is where we have the next page value, so the page param value, and it would be next page right here. After that, I want to go ahead and assign a class as well. So class name equals. And now I think, yeah, I need the curly brackets. I almost thought I needed quotes because I'm going to use a very short ternary here. I'm just checking to see if there is no previous page. If there is no previous page, then we're going to display the word more. That's like what we saw on page 1 because there was no previous page. If not, we can just put an empty string here. Now after this, I still need to close out the link component. And apologies, actually I put here what I want to display in the component because I want to display more if we're on the first page. And if not, it's not going to display anything there. But either way, we do need those 3 right arrows, which I'm using HTML entities, which is ampersand, GT for greater than, and a semicolon. So I'm just going to put 3 of those to give us those 3 right arrows. So we'll only see the word more if we're on page 1. Otherwise, we're just always going to have these 3 arrows for the next page area. So what do I need to change up here? Because I put this here where it actually needed to go down here in the content area. Here I meant to put mx-auto. So that, of course, is left and right, so it's going to center everything for us. And again, that's only needed if there is no previous page, so it pulls the word more to the center. Okay, our previous page area starts out a lot like the next page area, so I can highlight this, use Shift-Alt and the down arrow to copy that down, and then I can just change a few things to get started. So instead of next page area, this is going to look at previous. And notice how I changed. Now we were checking previous page here as well. Now when we get down into our link here, instead of previous page, we're going to be checking next page. So I'm going to select one, Control D to select the next, go over to the left and then get to the middle, delete that, switch those to next page. So much like before, but now we're checking next page. And instead of the word more, I want to use the word back. And then instead of the arrows to the right, and they were right arrows, so I can delete those, I want to put the arrows to the left of this content, and I want to have and LT semicolon. So this is the less than HTML entity. I'm going to have 3 of those, 1 space, and then of course our possible word back here if we're on the very last page. That's when it will display. And now we're going to add something else in here. And because of that, I need to once again put in a React fragment. And we want that fragment to be the parent. In other words, we would have an issue there. So we've got the parent, and now that gives us the possibility of putting something on the same level as the link here. This is where we're going to go ahead and map over the page nums that we calculated above. So page nums map, and now for each num, we will go through, I'll put one more parentheses so we can do this on additional lines. First, I'm going to check to make sure we have a page value. Remember, the current page, that is a prop we received. If we do have a current page value and we have our num equal to parse int page, so remember the page was also a string or undefined here. So we check to make sure it's not undefined. Then we check to make sure this number is equal to the value of page. That's why we use parse int. Now let's go ahead and put a ternary here. We'll just display the number. Now this is the number that is not a link. It wasn't underlined like when we looked at page 2, for example. 2 did not have the underline. That kind of indicates, hey, that's the page we're on. We're not going to make that a link, so you just reload the same page you're on. But if it's not that page, now we need the colon, and I'll go ahead and put in parentheses again. Now we're going to have a link here once again. So let me go ahead and just start typing this out, I guess. Link href is going to equal a template literal once again, and here we'll have /results have our topic, and after topic we'll have /. Now we'll just put in the num value, which was the page number, and that should be the full link. We also want a class name here though. So after that, space and say class name equals, now we can just use quotes and say underline, because Tailwind does not underline links by default. Now I'm going to close out the link on the next line. We'll put in the value, which is just the number. So we're using those numbers as links. And if you remember when we went to page 2, for example, we saw the links to 2, 3, 4, 5, but number 2 wasn't a link, but also these arrows we created are links. So that should put everything in place now for the footer, except we haven't put our previous page area, here's a previous, or next page area, actually into the JSX yet. So let's scroll down to the return. And now instead of a div, let's remove that. We can actually use a footer element. Inside the footer element, we're going to have the previous page area. And then we're also going to have the next page area. So that's the content we calculated above. Now the footer element itself needs a few class names from Tailwind. So we'll set up the class names here, and it will be flex row, justify between what we're showing, those numbers for example, put the items center. So that's all a fairly standard setup for our flex, whether it's row or column. Here we're using a row. Now padding on the x-axis, left and right, will set to 2. Padding on the y-axis, which is top and bottom, will set to 4. Font -bold. Now here's a setting that I like because it fits all the phones and it just doesn't adjust, which is W.60 for the width. You can see that's 240 pixels here. But you could remove this and then it would spread out further. So experiment with that and see what you like. And I set MX, which is the margins on the left and the right, to auto, so it just centers our pagination on the page. Now that should be complete, and we should be ready to use our footer back in the gallery. So let's go back to the gallery and import the footer at the top. There's our footer, and that comes from /footer. And now I'm going to scroll down where we had our note to add the footer, and we can see our footer props up here. So this is where the footer component is going to go. We have the footer component. Let's put in our brackets and spread in our footer props. After that, we can close out the component, and that should be finished. Now let's make sure our application is running in the terminal. Now let's take a look to see if our pagination is working in the application. So here we are on the curated page. Let's see if we need to reload. Nope, there is our more. It is now there. We'll click that to go to the next page. And when we go to the bottom, here's 2. It's not a link. There's 3, 4, and 5 that are links. And of course, here is number 6 as the right arrows. We could go back one page with the left arrows. So that all works as expected. If we go to page 5, now you can see the URL up here where curated/5, so both params are in the URL. And now this should also be applied to anything we search for. So if I search for watermelon, it's summertime, that always tastes good around here. There's some bright red watermelon. Scroll down, we've still got the more, and we can look at other pages. Here we get the 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So that's all working. Let's go ahead and request a page that doesn't exist, like page 1000. See what we get. No images found, and that's exactly what we wanted. Now, while we're here, there's one correction I want to make from way back when we created the search component. Next.js does have a default 404 page that works, and that's okay. For example, if we just press enter here and don't search for anything, we get a 404. Let's go ahead and fix that in the search component before we're finished with our project. Back in VS Code, let's go to the search component. All we need to do before the router.push is say if search. So we're making sure we have a value there. So we can save that. Now if we go back to our application and I press enter here, nothing happens. It's not going to do anything. It's just going to stay where it is. And that's really what we want. You should have to enter something. Now I could enter in something that doesn't make any sense and we get no images found, and that's okay too. And then when something does make sense, like van, for example, we should get some images of a van, and we do. So congratulations on completing this Next.js image gallery series. And you can really see how Next.js helps optimize images, and also how the modern development stack of Next.js, Tailwind CSS, TypeScript, and Zod all work together to create an application. Now, I encourage you to experiment. You could try a different pagination approach or layout. Maybe save your favorite images to a list or a database. Maybe add a page that will display a larger version of each image if they're clicked on. Remember, right now, if we click on an image, it should just take us to a new tab with the Pexels website in the image. So you could do more with that. And most importantly, just challenge yourself to keep learning. And I really hope you've enjoyed this series. A big thanks to Sean for inviting me onto his channel and into his dojo. And if you like my style of teaching, check out my channel, Dave Gray Teaches Code. Remember, keep striving for progress, and I hope to see you back in this web development dojo very soon.